Zapier absolutely sucks. And if you're wondering why or which platform you should be using for automating your business, then this video is for you. Here we're going to look at Zapier versus Integromat, or Make as it's now known, and really why I changed all of my clients, dozens and dozens of different businesses that I've worked with. I had built them out on Zapier 5-10 years ago, and I moved them all to Make.com because it's just so much better than Zapier. Zapier really sucks compared to Make.com. So let's jump in and have a look. Okay, so let's start with the biggest thing that I absolutely hate about Zapier, and that's their pricing. Zapier is really expensive. Their starting plan, if you're not on the free plan, is $30 US per month. Now that plan comes with 750 tasks per month. Now, what is a task? A task is simply a step within an automation in Zapier. So the trigger, that's one task, and then each action after that trigger is another task. So if we were to add an action here to then send this to ActiveCampaign, for instance, this would count as one task. And if we had something else happening after that, maybe going to Google Drive, that would be a second task. Now, if we added in a filter, formatter, or path, any of those in the orange, they do not count as a task. So 750 tasks is actually very limited when you start to think about how often is this scenario going to run. If I've got 10 steps in a scenario, well, then I can only run that scenario 75 times in the month, and that's just one scenario. More realistically, you probably need somewhere around 5,000 to 10,000 tasks for your automations, and then your pricing really starts to jump up. So the average Zapier account that I see usually sits around 200 US per month in the charges. Compare that to something like Make.com, and you can quickly see the big difference that you'll have using Make.com, where you're only charged $29 a month for 40,000 operations. And an operation here, it's pretty much the same as a task. Make do charge operations for iterators and aggregators. All these green ones get charged. But you've got so many operations here for such a low price that it really doesn't matter, those couple of extra operations. Their starting paid plan starts at $9 US a month, and that gives you 10,000 operations. That's almost, well, it's actually more than 10 times what you get with Zapier on their starting 750 task per month plan. So now let's have a look at the two different automation builders. Here we've got Zapier, and you can see immediately that Zapier works on a vertical building model. And so that means that we essentially start with one trigger, and then we build down the page as we add our actions. We do have the option of splitting our automation sequence into paths, which means that we can then filter each path so that maybe if a call is booked for an intro call, it goes down path A, and if it's a repeat client, well, then they go down path B, and different actions happen. We can also stack our paths on top of each other, and then we can build this sort of automation tree like so. Now, this is okay. It's much better than where they started with these paths. These were an absolute nightmare when they first added them about 5 years ago. But compared to Make.com, where it's just a simple drag and drop, we just add in our different applications here, click search, find the step that we want, add it in. We can even clone those, drag them over, create a new path anywhere in our logic. And it's just so much faster and more intuitive to work with than what Zapier is. And of course, you can zoom out. You can put these in any sort of pattern or order that you like. Maybe you want all the blue things over here. So a lot of people just sort of end up dragging things around on the screen so that it makes sense to them in how they've built their automation. And you can do that easily in Make.com. Inside of Zapier, you can't drag and drop anything. It's literally just click a button and then add something to that step. So you might be thinking, well, that's not that different. Make and Zapier, they're pretty much the same at this point. Well, now let's dive into actually configuring each of these steps. So here we've got our Calendly step, our trigger step, and I've added that to my scenario. And I have in Zapier this kind of forced hand holding each time I add something to my logic. Here I've added the invitee created as my trigger. Then I have to go through every single step in this process. I have to connect my account. I have to select the trigger, and then I have to then test each step as I build them. So I'll test my trigger here, and that pulls in some data so that Zapier knows what it can map into the next steps. For those of you that have used Zapier and Make, you'll actually notice that Zapier doesn't have everything in it when you go to choose your action or event. They've just handpicked a couple of the API calls that are available and put them into their system. Now, if you want to use something that's not handpicked by Zapier, well, then it gets really difficult. You have to custom build it, and you have to do all the hoop jumping and do all that sort of stuff to just access that one thing that Zapier deemed not necessary for their integration. Whereas if we look at it over on make.com, well, we have everything available with our ActiveCampaign module. And in fact, we also have this special module called Make an API Call. And what this allows us to do is call any endpoint, any API request that's listed in the API documentation. So this just opens up that we can do absolutely anything in this module as long as it's available from ActiveCampaign's API. You cannot do that in Zapier. You're restrained to whatever they've handpicked from the API for you to use. Now, they do that to make it less overwhelming and make it easier for the user to use. But if you're serious about automation, it's just going to be so frustrating to be limited on every single app that you try to integrate with, and then have to jump through all the hoops to try and add all these custom integrations all the time. So here we have the same thing of selecting our trigger. We choose our account. Now, these inside of make.com, they're all selected for you automatically. So I've added in my ActiveCampaign step here. And if I went and added a new ActiveCampaign step, well, Make is smart enough that it actually automatically maps the previous connection in the scenario. So they're trying to save those little bits of steps all along the way. They try and do it all automatically for you. And in fact, when you drag and drop a module into the scenario, it already knows all the fields that should exist when that call is made to the API, and it pulls all that data in. It doesn't need us to test it. And that means it saves us a whole step. We don't need to test it unless something breaks or it doesn't work, then we can go back and test it later on. Whereas Zapier, they force you to test every single step. So we can see here with Zapier, we can reference the previous module, and we do have to sort of double click a lot. And they've got this horrible little scrollable sort of window, which quite honestly is a horrible user experience, particularly if you have a smaller screen. You can't really see much on here. You get like 2 lines, 3 lines max, and it's just really hard to scroll through. Now, I actually have a fairly large screen and it still shows like this. Here we've just got some really clunky features to try and map these things across. And it adds so much friction when you try to use Zapier. Now, if we compare that to using make.com, we click, we open the module, we've got all this blank space on the screen. We've only got this very small module for our mapping. And how they've designed their system is that they only show you what's relevant at the time of selecting something. So here I'll just change my contact, and we can already see it's a lot easier to see all of our fields because it's in a pop-out window. We can also search our fields here, and you can see how fast it is to find those results and how quickly it filters them. It's not just showing us results from one module, but it shows us results from all the modules. And we can also collapse modules and then just search certain modules as well to really speed things up. It's just a great interface to work with, and it's very, very fast to build your automations using Make, and very, very slow and frustrating to build them with Zapier. So something else that I really hate about Zapier is that it's really hard to make changes to existing Zaps. And particularly, it's hard to make bulk edits to things. So let's imagine we've got our ActiveCampaign connection here, and for some reason we need to change our account. Maybe we set up a new account, or we duplicate this Zap from one account to another, and we need to make those changes. In Zapier, you'd have to select each and every action for ActiveCampaign, Then you'd have to go through the whole step again, go to the account, select the account, click continue, go through to action, make sure that's mapped, then you have to retest it. And you have to do that for every single module. So here we've got, say, 4 different active campaign modules. Well, once you do it for number 1, you have to go through all those steps again for module number 2 and module number 3 and module number 4. And it takes forever to make those changes. It takes maybe 3-4 minutes per module just to change the account that you're referencing for that action. Now compare that to make.com. So quite easily in make.com, we can make bulk changes, and they've got this great little Chrome extension called Developer Tools. And with that, we've got a whole host of special tools that allow us to do bulk updates to pretty much anything in our scenario. And it's across the entire scenario. So if we wanted to swap our connection, well, we just need to swap it on one of the modules that uses that connection. And then we just select that module, and then we can map that new connection to every other module that uses that old sort of connection. And that's literally a 1-second click, and it just runs and updates everything. We can also remap variables. So that means that if we change a field in a job form from, say, an email field to a text field for some reason, well, we might delete that original field and then replace it with a new field. Now that new field will have a new ID associated to it. And everywhere in our make scenario, we would need to replace that reference to the old field with the new field. We can do that really quickly and easily here. We just pull in the thing that we want to replace, paste that in here, the old thing, and then replace it with the new thing, and then run this, and it will update that reference throughout the entire scenario. We can also remap sources. And this is really handy for when we maybe upgrade a module. Maybe Google Sheets releases a new API version, and we have to go through our scenarios and update from version 1 to version 2. Well, we can do that fairly quickly here. We can select our old source module and then change it to our new target module, and then update all those references in one click. There's a whole range of cool little features that we can use here that help you build automations very quickly for your business. Now, in addition to that, we can also export our blueprints, export our scenarios, and then we can just edit these with a text editor on our computer and then re-import those edits back into Make. And that's another great way to just quickly make bulk changes or search for things within our scenario and then find and replace them with something else. Now, Zapier has no way of exporting their Zaps, which means that we can't just export it, search, replace, and then import it back into Zapier. We can share our Zaps, but that doesn't allow us to actually see the code that creates this logic, and we can't even edit the code. So that means we're really constrained to working within this drag and drop and doing everything manually. And it just takes a lot of time and effort to update things in bulk in Zapier. I really hate it. Now, here's another thing I hate about Zapier, and that's their ability to handle errors. Whenever an error happens in your Zap, in your automation, it gets logged here in the Zap history. Zapier sends you an email, and in that email it says, hey, this thing didn't finish, go to Zapier and fix it. Now, that's okay if you only get the occasional issue, but if you get the same issue all the time for a Zap, maybe your API goes down for maintenance every now and then, you're going to have to put a filter in your Zap, which means that now you're just not letting contacts go past a certain step. And that's okay, but you lose that data, right? You may still want to push it onto the other steps that are after the step that's erroring. Or you might want to do something else if that is the case. Well, you can do that in Zapier, but you end up creating these horrible if this, then that logic trees, and they're just really messy and cumbersome. So you can go here and you can replay Zaps and try to fix Zaps manually, but it's just a horrible way to do it. Compare that to make.com, where we can add in error handlers within the actual scenario itself. For instance, here's a scenario triggered from a webhook, and that webhook returns a blog ID, and then we're looking that blog up on Bubble. Now, if the webhook doesn't have a blog ID, well, then this step is going to error. And what do we want to do when that errors? In this case, we're just ignoring it. It was a false webhook request, therefore just ignore that and don't do any of these other steps. But I could also send myself an email. I could also log this in Airtable. I could log it back into Bubble. I can do anything I want in this error path. And anytime that this module errors, it will then take this path and complete it. And then at the end, it ignores this particular data. Now, if it doesn't error, it goes through all the other steps here, and then it might error on another leg in its journey. How this differs to Zapier is that we actually get to put the error handler logic within the scenario itself. So that means that as we use the scenario, we might discover that maybe ChatGPT times out every now and then. We'll just put an error handler on here, and when it times out, we'll just take a break for 5 minutes and then retry that same request in the future, because maybe we've just hit the API call limit. There's a whole bunch of different ways that we can handle errors in Make.com, and they're really useful because sometimes you might want to just ignore something. Sometimes if it errors, you might want to just stop everything and you might want to take a break in the scenario and retry that thing in a few seconds or a few minutes. There's a whole range of different ways that we can handle those errors. And the benefit here is we get to build them into the logic so that every time that error happens at that particular module, the system already knows how to handle it. And that means that we can build scenarios that get smarter over time. The more that we use them, the more that they error, the less that they will error in the future because we handle those errors in the logic. We don't have to constantly go into our Zapier error history and clear hundreds of errors. Now, I hope that this video has shown you some of the core reasons why I don't recommend anyone use Zapier and why I really recommend everyone to use Make.com. So much cheaper, so much easier, much better to do automation with, and it's just a better platform in so many ways. Now, if you don't have a Make account, you can get a free 1-month subscription to the Pro plan using the link below this video. Just click it and sign up via that link, and you'll get 1 month for free.